My own son and his wife tricked me into signing away my life, then locked me away in a freezing garage. They took my money, cut me off from my friends, and whispered about having me declared legally insane so they could sell my house, all while I was just a few feet away. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot that for 47 years I worked at the courthouse, and their every word was being captured by a tiny hidden recorder. They were about to learn what real justice felt like. It started at Sunday dinner. My son Michael and his wife Rachel sat at my polished mahogany table, the one my late husband David and I had bought 47 years ago. Michael brought a bottle of wine that was far too expensive, setting it down like an offering. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His face had a pale, clammy look I hadn't seen since he got caught cheating on a high school history exam. Rachel, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of frantic energy. She kept fluffing the cushion behind my back, speaking about me as if I weren't even in the room. I remember her saying to Michael, "She looks tired, don't you think? We have to make sure she's not overdoing it." I was right there chewing my pot roast, but in Rachel's eyes I had already become an object, a piece of furniture to be managed. I saw the cracks in their performance, the desperation clinging to them like cheap cologne. That dinner was the beginning. In the week that followed, a soft, suffocating net began to close around me. My life, once my own, was now being curated by Rachel. She started getting the mail before I did, spreading it on the kitchen counter with a bright, false smile. It was just to help me sort the bills, she'd say, her fingers deftly separating the bank statements from the letters from my friends. Then the phone calls. My friend Eleanor called to chat about our bridge club, but Rachel answered. She told Eleanor I was resting, that I needed my quiet. The calls became less frequent after that. When my neighbor Susan stopped by with a casserole, Rachel met her at the door with a gracious but firm refusal. It was so kind, she told Susan, but Catherine was just too tired for company. I watched from the living room window as Susan retreated, a confused look on her face. I was being dismissed gently and methodically, erased from my own life under the guise of loving care. The final piece of their plan fell into place that Friday. Michael came over alone, his agitation palpable in the small, quiet house. He was holding a sheaf of papers, a folder from my bank. He told me they were just routine updates for my accounts, something the bank needed done right away. He kept glancing at his watch, saying he had to get them back before the branch closed. My mind, the part that had spent a lifetime organizing legal files and spotting discrepancies, screamed at me to read every word. But my body betrayed me. My hand, still unsteady from the mild stroke a few months back, trembled as I took the pen. I looked at my son's face, at the pleading in his eyes, and I chose to trust him. I chose to believe in the boy I had raised, not the panicked man standing before me. I signed where his finger pointed my signature, a spidery, uncertain scrawl on a line I couldn't properly read. They moved me into the converted garage that weekend. It was for my own good, they explained. It was on the ground floor, so no stairs, and it would give me peace and quiet. The room was clean, sterile, and cold. A damp chill seeped through the concrete floor that no rug could conquer. They closed the door to the kitchen, leaving me in a silence that felt less like peace and more like a tomb. That night, I lay awake, wrapped in 3 blankets, when I heard a sound through the door. It was Rachel's voice, a furious, panicked whisper that cut through the silence. The words were clipped sharp with terror. I heard bits and pieces. Forbearance is over. The notice is final. And then, clear as a bell, a sentence that froze the very blood in my veins. We have to liquidate her assets now before they take our house. The word hung in the cold air between us, an invisible final judgment. Liquidate. It wasn't about my health or my peace. It was a hostile takeover, and I had just signed the surrender. By the way, if you're enjoying the story so far, Please consider subscribing so you don't miss what's next. We'd also love to hear your own story if you'd like to share it with our community. Now let's get back to it. Lying in that cold room, the word liquidate echoed in the darkness. The shock didn't bring tears. It brought a strange, icy clarity. The grief for the son I thought I had, for the trust I had so foolishly given, solidified into something hard and useful resolve. I was a frail old woman in a converted garage. Yes, but for 47 years I was a court secretary. I knew the machinery of justice, the importance of procedure, and the fatal weakness of sloppy paperwork. They thought they were dealing with a confused invalid. They were about to find out they were dealing with Catherine Collins. My first move had to be precise. I needed to probe the cracks in their conspiracy, and I knew Michael, my dear weak-willed son, was the weakest point. I waited 2 days, letting the silence settle, playing the part of the docile, slightly dazed mother they wanted to see. Then when Rachel went out for what she called errands, I saw my chance. Michael brought me a cup of tea, his hands trembling slightly. I looked up at him, feigning a moment of thoughtful recollection. I told him I'd been thinking about my old job at the courthouse, and wasn't it funny how things change? We always had to notarize important financial documents. I mused every single one. I asked him if the bank had changed its policy on that. He flinched. It was a small, barely perceptible motion, but I saw it. His eyes darted away and he gave a short, nervous laugh. He mumbled something about new online banking regulations, how everything was digital now, and notarization was becoming a thing of the past. The lie was clumsy, poorly constructed, and utterly transparent. He may as well have confessed right then and there. That evening, I laid the second part of my trap. As Rachel was clearing my dinner tray, I asked her the exact same question, using the same tone of casual curiosity. I mentioned how Michael had explained the new bank policies to me. Rachel scoffed, a sound full of condescending confidence. She assured me that of course the papers were notarized, that they had handled everything properly, and I didn't need to worry my head about it. That was it. The blatant contradiction the two of them tangled in their own sloppy deceit. It was all the proof I needed. Their panic was making them careless. My opportunity to act came the following Tuesday, with a scheduled follow-up appointment with my doctor. Michael drove me, of course. I wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone. As he pulled into the vast hospital parking garage to find a spot, I told him my legs felt a bit stiff, and I'd just wait for him by the main entrance. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I walked as quickly as my frail legs could carry me to a quiet alcove in the lobby. My hands shook as I pulled a few coins from my purse and dropped them into the payphone, a relic just like me. I dialed the number I knew by heart. Eleanor answered on the second ring. I kept my voice weak, playing the part of the confused woman they believed me to be. I told her I was a little muddled about some papers Michael had me sign. I asked if she would do an old friend a favor and just check the county's public records for my property. I told her I just wanted to make sure my estate planning was in order. Eleanor, sharp as ever, didn't ask too many questions. I heard the quiet promise in her voice when she told me she'd look into it right away. That single phone call must have spooked them more than I could have imagined. In the days that followed, the cage got smaller, the bars thicker. When I asked for my checkbook to pay my monthly donation to the library, Rachel informed me with a saccharine smile that she would be managing all my expenses from now on, just to take the burden off me. The checkbook vanished from my desk drawer. Then the baby monitor appeared on my nightstand. They said it was to make sure I was safe during the night in case I needed anything. But I knew what it was. It was a listening device, an unblinking electronic eye. Its little red light glowed in the dark, a constant, oppressive reminder that I was no longer a mother in her own home. I was a prisoner. That little red eye on the baby monitor became my audience. If they wanted a confused, declining old woman, then that's exactly what I would give them. My mind, which had once tracked complex court dockets, was now entirely focused on this performance. I began my strategic retreat. The next morning, I asked Michael what day it was. He told me it was Wednesday. An hour later, with the monitor humming silently on the nightstand, I asked him again. I saw the look pass between him and Rachel, a mixture of pity and relief. It was working. I started leaving my reading glasses in the bathroom, asking Rachel to find them for me. I'd nod along as she explained for the third time how the new remote control worked, only to look at it with vacant confusion a little while later. I was lulling them into a state of absolute confidence, letting them believe their path was clear. They thought my earlier questions had been a final flicker of a dying candle. Now they just saw the smoke. Their confidence made them careless. And in their carelessness, I learned the true depth of their desperation. A few days into my performance, I was in my room pretending to be asleep. The door was cracked open just enough for sound to travel. I heard Rachel in the kitchen, her voice low and tense. It was a phone call, but the tone was different from when she talked to her friends. This was deferential, almost fearful. I couldn't hear the other side, but Rachel's words painted a terrifying picture. I heard her promise someone that things were moving forward. I heard her mention an appraiser who would be driving by the house. Then came the words that made the hair on my arms stand up. She was talking about a competency ruling and how after that the title transfer could begin. Her voice dropped to an urgent whisper as she finished the call, a pleading sound in her throat as she said she just needed a little more time. A private lender, a competency hearing to have me declared legally insane, a title transfer. It wasn't just my money they were after. They were going to steal my home, my name, my very identity. That night, while the monitor's red eye watched over my feigned sleep, I began my counteroffensive. There was an old shoebox on the top shelf of my closet filled with keepsakes from my husband David. I waited until I was sure they were both asleep. Then carefully, quietly, I retrieved it. Tucked beneath a bundle of his old letters was a small silver box. Inside was a voice-activated recorder he'd given me for my birthday years ago. He'd joked that I should use it to write my memoirs. I never did. Now it would serve a far more important purpose. I found the charging cable and plugged it into an outlet hidden behind my dresser. I sat in the dark watching the tiny charging light, a secret companion to the hostile red eye of the monitor. The next night I began. With the recorder hidden under my blankets, I started my audio diary. I spoke in a whisper, documenting every dismissive comment, the chill in the room, the conversations I was having. I was building a case exhibit by exhibit. The arrogance I had been cultivating in Rachel finally bloomed into a fatal mistake. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was in my room, napping, as usual, with my new secret weapon recording silently beside me. The door was ajar. Rachel was on the phone in the kitchen again, but this time her voice was light, conspiratorial. She was talking to a friend. Bloated with confidence, she began to brag. I heard her complain about the burden of caring for me, and then she delivered the final damning piece of evidence. She laughed, a sound that was sharp and ugly, and told her friend not to worry. They had found a doctor who was very cooperative about the competency hearing. Once that was done, she said they could finally sell my house and solve their little cash flow problem. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I didn't move a muscle. I just lay there in the cold, while the small silver device under my blanket captured every single treacherous word. I finally had it. The first piece of hard proof. The web wasn't just deepening. I was now the one pulling the strings. With the recording secured, a strange calm settled over me. I had the weapon. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to use it. I continued my performance of frail and forgetful ghost in my own home, all while the tiny silver recorder in my pocket documented every cold meal, every condescending remark. I was waiting for Eleanor. I knew my friend and I knew that looking into it meant she would leave no stone unturned. The waiting was the hardest part. Every ring of the doorbell sent a jolt through me, a mixture of hope and fear. It happened on a Thursday morning. The doorbell chimed sharp and insistent. I heard Rachel's annoyed footsteps, then her voice strained with false politeness, trying to dismiss a visitor. But the other voice was cheerful, firm, and utterly unstoppable. It was Eleanor. Before Rachel could invent another excuse, Eleanor breezed past her and into the main living area, where Michael was nervously reading the paper. She was carrying a thick manila envelope and a smile as bright and dangerous as a surgeon's scalpel. She called out to me, her voice ringing with warmth, telling me she'd brought those records I'd asked her to look up. Rachel's face went white. Eleanor didn't wait for an invitation. She walked right to the doorway of my cold room, looked me in the eye, and pulled out the first document with a flourish. She announced to the stunned room that here was a copy of the durable power of attorney I'd signed last week. Then, with perfect timing, she pulled out a second paper. Her voice remained pleasant, but it had an edge of steel as she added that she'd also found this a petition filed just yesterday to have me declared incompetent. They'd already scheduled the hearing, she said, admiring their efficiency. The official court filing laid bare in the morning light was the blow that shattered Michael. He made a strange, wounded sound and literally collapsed into a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. It all came out then, a torrent of shame and fear. He confessed everything to me, the words tumbling over each other. He told me about Rachel's boutique, how it had been a failure from the start, funded by high-interest private loans he hadn't known the extent of. He told me about the foreclosure notice on their own home, the constant threatening calls from the lender. He was weeping now, great shuddering sobs of a man who had lost his way entirely. Rachel stood frozen for a moment, her face a mask of fury. When she finally broke, there were no tears of remorse, only the hot, angry tears of self-pity. She started screaming that they were going to lose everything, their reputation, their friends, their whole life. She looked at me, her eyes full of accusation, and shrieked about what else they were supposed to do. Her self-pity was the spark that ignited the explosion. Michael lifted his head, his face blotchy and tear-streaked, and screamed back at her that her stupid, overpriced boutique was the cause of all of it. Their conspiracy fractured right there in my kitchen. He accused her of lying about the debt. She accused him of being too weak to handle it, of failing as a man, as a provider. It was a storm of ugly recriminations, all their private failures and resentments laid bare for me and Eleanor to witness. They had been a united front against me, but now, under the first sign of pressure, they were tearing each other to pieces. I let them scream. I watched as the last vestiges of their partnership were shredded by their mutual blame. When their rage had exhausted itself into ragged, panting breaths, I finally spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chaos with absolute authority. I told them that was enough. They both turned to look at me, their faces a mess of tears and fury. I held up my hand, and in it was the small silver digital recorder. I told them I had recorded everything. The threats I'd overheard, the plans for the hearing, the truth about the cooperative doctor. I told them I even had a log of the temperature in my room each night. They stared at the small device as if it were a bomb. The frail old woman they had dismissed and imprisoned was gone. In her place was the judge. I told them exactly what would happen next. They would call their lawyer and withdraw the petition. They would sign a full and immediate revocation of the power of attorney, and then I told them they would wait. They stood there silent and broke in their faces a canvas of pure terror. They finally understood. Their future was no longer in their hands. It was in mine. The week that followed was a masterclass in silence and fear. As I had demanded, Michael and Rachel immediately contacted their lawyer and undid the damage. The competency hearing was canceled. The power of attorney was legally revoked. They moved through my house like ghosts, speaking only in hushed whispers, their eyes darting towards me whenever I entered a room. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a raw, palpable terror. They were waiting for my next instruction for the final judgment, and the not knowing was its own kind of prison. I let them wait. I moved my things back into my own bedroom, leaving the cold garage room empty. Eleanor was a quiet, constant presence, bringing me meals and sitting with me in the library as I planned the final act. I wasn't interested in a messy family meeting or a dramatic confrontation. The damage they had done was a formal, legalistic kind of violence. The justice I decided had to be the same. The following Tuesday, I was sitting in the library, a book open but unread in my lap. Eleanor sat opposite me knitting. At precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I saw them pull up. It wasn't just one car, but two. The first was the sensible sedan belonging to Eleanor's son, a sharp lawyer named Mr. Davies. The second was a Delaware County police cruiser. It parked right at the curb, official and undeniable. I didn't get up. My part in this was over. I had gathered the evidence and passed sentence. Now the agents of the court would carry it out. I watched as Mr. Davies, carrying a thick legal envelope, and two uniformed police officers walked up my front path. The doorbell rang. I heard Rachel's tentative footsteps and the click of the door opening. I couldn't see her face, but I could imagine her shock. Mr. Davies did not engage in conversation. His voice was calm and professional, carrying clearly through the quiet house. He simply announced that he was there to serve Michael and Rachel Collins. He handed Rachel the papers. From my window, I had a perfect view of the street. Our neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who always seemed to be tending her roses at the most interesting times, was frozen mid-snip, her gaze locked on the police car in my driveway. The judgment wasn't being delivered in a courtroom by a black-robed judge. It was being delivered right here on my front porch in full view of the world they were so desperate to impress. The documents were simple, cold, and final. The first was a petition for a restraining order against both of them, citing elder abuse. It was backed by sworn affidavits and meticulously transcribed time-stamped quotes from my little silver recorder. The second document was a formal immediate notice of eviction from my property. The silence in the house was broken by the voice of one of the officers, polite but implacable. He informed them that per the order they had 1 hour to gather their personal belongings and vacate the premises. He added that he and his partner would remain to ensure the process was orderly. The public humiliation was absolute. There was no argument, no room for negotiation. There was only the quiet, efficient machinery of the law turning them out of the home they had tried to steal. I did not press criminal charges. There would be no trial, no jail time. The justice was in the perfect cold reversal of their crime. They had sought to make me a prisoner in my own home to preserve their social standing. Now they were being publicly cast out, rendered homeless in front of their neighbors. They had tried to erase me, to render me invisible and silent. Now, they were the subject of a legal order that made their abuse a matter of public record. As I watched them scurry to pack a few bags, their faces pale with shock and shame, I felt no glee. I felt only the profound, quiet satisfaction of a world being set right. They had built a cage for me out of their greed and desperation. I had simply used the key I knew best, the law, to lock them out of my life for good. After the police cruiser and my son's car pulled away, a profound silence settled over the house. It was a clean, quiet emptiness, not the lonely kind. Eleanor stayed with me, and the first thing we did was call a locksmith. The sound of the tumblers being changed, the sharp metallic clicks, was the sound of my life being secured once more. In the days that followed the story, as I knew it would, rippled through the neighborhood, starting with Mrs. Gable and spreading like wildfire. Eleanor, my loyal friend and intelligence gatherer, told me what she'd heard. She said that Michael and Rachel had ended up at a dingy motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs. Their phones, once buzzing with social engagements, had gone silent. The friends they had been so desperate to impress, the ones for whom they had sacrificed their integrity, had heard the story and vanished. The social death they had feared more than anything had arrived swift and absolute. Months passed. The chill of autumn gave way to the deep cold of a Pennsylvania winter, but my house was warm. I hired a contractor, a kind young man who listened patiently as I described what I wanted, and we transformed that cold, miserable garage. We tore out the thin drywall, put in proper insulation, and heated floors. We added a large bay window that looked out onto my garden. It became my library, lined with my husband's books, and my own, a place of sunlight and quiet contemplation. I started hosting my bridge club again. My friends filled the house with laughter and conversation, and it felt like my own again. With Eleanor's help, I took the first steps toward a new purpose. We used a portion of the assets I had fought so hard to protect to establish a small fund, a legal aid service for seniors who found themselves in situations like mine. I was not a victim anymore. I was a founder, turning my pain into a shield for others. One day, a letter arrived. It was from Michael. The handwriting was shaky. He wrote that he had found a job on a construction site, that the work was hard, but honest. He told me that Rachel was staying with her sister, bitter and blaming me for destroying her family. But Michael's words were different. There were no excuses, no justifications. There was only a simple, profound apology for his weakness, for the betrayal. He asked for nothing, not forgiveness, not a second chance. He was just reporting the facts. 6 months after they had been forced to leave, I was sitting in my new library. Sunlight streamed through the bay window, warming the polished wood of the floor. The mail arrived, and among the bills and catalogs was another letter from Michael. Inside, along with another short factual note about his life, was a check for $200. In the memo line, he had written a single phrase, "for utilities." It was a pittance, of course. It wouldn't even begin to cover the cost of the pain they had inflicted. But I knew it wasn't about the money. It was the first brick in a long wall of amends he had to build. It was an acknowledgement of the debt, a tangible piece of accountability. I placed the check on my desk beside his first letter. I knew I would never cash it. The act of him sending it was payment enough. I looked out the window at my garden, dormant under a thin blanket of snow, but full of the promise of spring. The house was quiet. I was safe. I was in control. The long, bitter winter of my ordeal had finally passed, and justice, I realized, was not a storm. It was the quiet peace that follows. In the end, Catherine's story became a lesson not in loud, fiery revenge, but in the quiet, methodical power of experience. Her son and his wife saw only a frail, aging woman, an obstacle to be managed and dismissed. They never thought to look deeper, to see the 47 years of accumulated knowledge, the sharp mind that had navigated a world of procedure and consequence. Her victory wasn't a shout. It was the silent click of a locksmith changing a tumbler, the rustle of a correctly filed document, and the profound peace of a world set back in order.